Waiting, waiting. I hope my internet's not crapping out. We're gonna see. It's probably. Oh yes, we are live. I'm here with my friend Brian. How you doing?
Great, David. Great to be with you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. My dad always calls me Brian. He forgets my name and calls me Brian because I look like his brother. I look and act like his brother Brian. So
I love that.
nice name. I've got a soft spot in my heart for the name Brian. Do you remember what it means?
Noble and
Ah,
strength and virtue.
is it like a Viking name or what kind of name is it?
Irish.
Oh, it's Irish. Yeah, yeah, Viking.
Those
Yeah.
those those folks from the island. I had on one side of my family. Nobody left the islands. They were either in England as dairy farmers, Scotland as knows what, and probably Ireland as drinkers and potato farmers or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I did my family's done the genealogy for years, and it's all, you know, Irish, Scottish, English, Welsh, with just little stuff from the peripheries. But I used to think that was boring, but it's kind of in vogue now. This whole white supremacy thing's in vogue. So I'm like the poster
Well,
child. I'm the poster child for.
now everybody has your genealogy thanks to 23andMe, right?
Yeah. So, listen, the way I like to start, we got a lot of things to chat about, but I only have an hour because I got to go to a anti-vax party. That's another story. But I want to hear your backstory in terms of faith and philosophy. So, how were you raised, and what's your journey been like? Just talk us through the whole thing, the highlights.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, born mom and dad. Dad came to faith later in life. Mom, interesting. She would attended church thanks to her mother um, throughout her childhood. But really, when she went to university, she had an authentic faith experience with, I would say, her second mother, who helped bring her along in her faith. And I would call it nominally evangelical
Okay.
and with maybe a little Pentecostal bent, right? And this my mother. This was during the mid '70s, and when she graduated from university in Virginia, Virginia Tech, also the university I attended, she moved to a small town in Southern Virginia. And she would tell you today that she had the most authentic faith experience. She lived on a communal farm with other Christians.
Ooh.
And these were all Jesus people. You've heard of the Jesus movement. These were Jesus people. And there's a lot more I could say there, but that's her story. And then I was born in 1981 to this mother who had a very real, authentic faith experience, and a father who I would say was early in his faith. And they were both, I would say, broadly ecumenical, evangelical Christians that were not tied closely to a denomination, but had a real faith in the risen Jesus. And they saw that as that there was an opportunity to live that and to raise their children in the faith.
How many kids did they have?
They had 3 kids in the first batch, and then the second batch, 2 adopted children.
Ah. Any Christians among them?
Yeah, interesting. Obviously, I won't go into detail about my brothers and sisters'
Yeah.
faith
Yeah.
experience, but each of us, my parents also raised individuals. So they didn't tell us what to think or how to think, but they certainly told us what they thought,
Yeah.
shared that, and we certainly attended church growing up, but each person went down their own journey and is still on their own journey. All five, myself and 4 siblings. Um, I'm the oldest, and I would say, you know, nominally a Christian. I would say that I gave my faith to Christ in a kindergarten that was held, a small private kindergarten, and the teacher asked us if we wanted to say a prayer to ask Jesus into our hearts. And I can distinctly remember that. It was pre-nap time, as a 6 or 7 year old. And it was a real experience where I, consciously gave my faith and made it my own. But as you know, like obviously I was 6, 7 years old. So there's a lot of life to be lived past then. I would not call myself, committed or mature in any shape or form. Um, I attended some private schools growing up. We moved to several different areas. I was born in Ohio, moved to New York, Kentucky, Florida. We moved overseas to Japan for 3 years. And in each of those places, we belonged to different churches. And then we moved back to the U.S. and it was interesting. The best schools that my parents could find to enroll us in this community in Western Massachusetts happened to be the local Catholic school. So I attended Catholic school there for 3 years, and there were some very very faithful Christians there. But I was also running, in middle school, running with some troublemakers, and I was probably chief among them. Um, and after we moved from Massachusetts to Philadelphia, and in the course of that move, that summer, two things happened. One is I worked at a Boy Scout summer camp, and I was kind of on my own. I lived at the summer camp, and my dad would pick me up on Saturday, and I'd spend 24 hours with the family, and then I'd return to work at the summer camp as a 14-year-old young man. The other thing that happened that summer was I got connected with a parachurch ministry that spurred off of Campus Crusade. It was called Student Venture. It was Campus Crusade's high school ministry. And there was a leader there, John Carricker, that was very influential in my life. And he was, I would say that he was a reformed thinker. And he introduced me to some ideas that, as I would say, the average, broad evangelical in the United States probably doesn't get exposure to unless they do their own reading and so on, or unless they have a mentor like John. So that was helpful. And I think during that move from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania, I made a decision to stop hanging out with the group that I was hanging out with, the kind of groups that I was hanging out with in middle school, and really made my faith became my own, became much more adult-like, and I began to seek God in a serious way, not without its set of hiccups, but from then on, I could see in my own life steady growth, steady maturity. And so, not to make a long story long, but from high school into college and then into young adulthood, there were about 4 individuals that really helped disciple me in that process. And they were all from very different. I mentioned John, a great, a great student of the Reformed faith. The next person I would say would be Bob Klein. He was one of those student venture leaders, and he was quite an evangelist. He introduced me to street evangelism, which was very different as a young high school student, to share my faith, my story. And then, and going into college, by happenstance, or by providence, I met a gentleman by the name of Ron Bernard. And Ron ran a ministry called Chi Alpha. It was at Virginia Tech. And Chi Alpha is actually the college ministry of the largest Pentecostal church in the United States, the Assembly of God Ministries. But Ron was very ecumenical. The college ministry, you wouldn't, looking at it from the outside in, you wouldn't recognize it as a Pentecostal or charismatic ministry. But Ron lived an authentic faith walk, and you could see it every day. And he was very helpful in those 4 years in college. And as I ventured out of college, at the very end of college, the fall of 2003, I met a gentleman that would be influential for the next 5 or so years of my life. And I met him at a retreat that my parents happened to have been invited to, and I tagged along at, and that was Chuck Colson. And I met Chuck on a weekend in I guess it was late September, early October of 2003 in Virginia. And Chuck, as you know, a great thinker, great writer, but he was, he would write me some letters, ask me what I was studying, what I was reading, and really took an interest, as he did with many people. There's many that could point to Chuck's discipleship, and I knew him, until he passed away. And then lastly, the other gentleman that's been extremely influential in my life is a teacher by the name of Ray Vanderland. And I've known Ray since 2006. And Ray teaches the Bible in its geographical and historical context. And I've benefited so much from that, and have now started leading trips myself to what is Asia Minor, what was Asia Minor, what is now modern day Turkey.
Wow, very cool,
So
exciting.
yeah,
Yeah. So, how do you integrate and assimilate all of those diverse aspects of Christianity, including the Catholic aspect? I mean, maybe there wasn't much that you took with you, but which elements dominate? Which do you emphasize, and which are you neglecting on purpose? Which are you neglecting just because you haven't got around to sort of diving into and unpacking some of the gems, some of the treasure that you've picked up along the way? It's like maybe it's too much for you to appreciate all of it all at once. So how do
it
you
is hard to
how
appreciate
do you
it. Yeah,
prioritize how you're going to emphasize what you're going to emphasize in your walk?
I'm not sure that it's always conscious, David.
Uh,
You know,
uh,
I think some of these things are it's almost in my being of who
uh,
I am, right? Like I
yeah.
can be very comfortable in a Catholic mass or in an
Okay.
Anglican high church setting,
Uh.
but I can also, uh, it wouldn't scare me if somebody brought out a snake for a little snake handling.
Wow.
So,
You've done
um,
that? Have you done that?
no, no, I joke about it. I mean, I was
Okay.
close enough to it in Virginia, West Virginia kind of jokes.
Okay.
But no, in all seriousness, like, people joke about that and say, like, why would somebody handle snakes? Well, it's because they read their Bible, right?
Yeah.
It's because they read their Bible. And
Yeah.
you're like, what? They read their Bible? Absolutely. They read it a little differently than you or I might read it, but they read their Bible. At least they did that. And they said to themselves, gosh darn it, if a snake bit Paul and he wasn't harmed or killed, and these people were amazed by it, and it was a miraculous, even prophetic sign, then they read it like that and they say, let's bring out some snakes at our church service. Now, I don't do that at my church service, but at least I can appreciate it.
Yeah. Where do you go, for example, on a Sunday? Where would you go these days?
Yeah, my wife and I attend First Baptist Church here
Okay.
in Yukon.
Uh,
It's a
oh,
church that
you're in the Yukon?
not the Yukon Territory of Canada.
Ah,
We have this little town in Oklahoma called Yukon, Oklahoma. People
okay.
think we live in Canada. It's kind of named because we have a river in the United States called the Canadian River,
Uh,
and it runs right through our community.
uh,
So,
that's pretty cool.
but yeah, not in the Yukon Territory. It's almost as cold, but it's a little warmer.
Yeah,
But
lucky
yeah, we
you.
go to a Baptist church, week in, week out. And as you probably know, at least in the United States, you could probably substitute Bible church, community church, Baptist church,
Okay.
evangelical church. You could blend them all
Okay.
together. There's not a whole lot of distinctives. It's kind of, it's a bit, it's low church and vanilla sort of
Uh,
uh, liturgy, right? But
okay.
everybody's got a liturgy. Don't
Yeah.
let them lie to you.
Yeah, and everyone has tradition too. That's another thing. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
everybody believes in some authority,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
it ain't only what's in the text.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, I've got a little bias towards the Baptists because some Satan. I used to be a Satanist before I became a Catholic.
Oh my.
Some people joke that's not a big leap, but It is a big leap. But you know, one of these Satanist guys that I watched on YouTube, he came to the Catholic faith too, and he said that the demon he I think he was into the theistic Satanism. I was into atheistic Satanism, but he said that the demons attack the Catholic Church and the Baptists because those are the two that are really powerful, and you know, so that gives me a little bias. I don't know if even if it's true. I don't think this guy might be making up
I
stories.
think you're right. I mean, for whatever their faults are, they get things done. And you know, what I appreciate is that amongst my Baptist friends and relatives, they have authentic, real faith that they try to live out. And and uh, and I can't say that that's always the case of every Christian denomination. The other thing is, um, to borrow a phrase of John Wimber, who's more on the charismatic slant, he had a little different idea when he said these words. But the Baptists do the stuff. Now, Wimber said the stuff. What's the stuff? Well, the stuff is healing. The stuff is
Uh,
exorcism. The stuff
uh,
is that's Wimber's idea, right? Of you know, when are we going to do the stuff? The stuff that Jesus told us we were going to do,
yeah.
right? And that we would do even greater things than he did. But the Baptists, they do the stuff, meaning they serve the poor,
Mm,
they help the needy,
yeah.
they, you know, they care for the unborn, as do Catholics, right? They do the stuff, and that really matters to me. It's not just about, you know, some broad evangelical, you know, lady. I'm actually running a political campaign at the same time here. But today I was out knocking doors, and the lady asked me. She was pretty aggressive on a number of things. I always have about one funny story from door knocking, 100, 150 doors each day. And the one today was a lady. She's been receiving my postcards that tell about me and share a little bit about my faith. And she said, "Are you a Christian evangelist?" And you know, and that's the tone. And I said, "Absolutely." You know, not that I mean, I'm not an evangelist every day. That's not my but absolutely, I tell people about the good news at every, you know, opportunity that presents itself. And she's like, "Well, you and I are not on the same team." I was like, "Woo, that's bold."
She's
Right.
Muslim or what?
I don't know. I don't, I'm not, we didn't go that far. You know, I didn't want to stay on the porch long enough to find out. In Oklahoma, bad things can happen if you stay on the porch too long.
Oh, oh. Well, what's your hunch? Is she is she a religious fanatic that's Christian of a really
I
narrow
think she's
sect, or
opposed. I think she's had some maybe negative experiences
she's anti-Christian,
with
anti-Christian?
some kind of spirituality, or
Okay.
she has seen people that are kind of over the top.
Uh,
You know,
you shouldn't have had those snakes with you. That would have probably calmed her down.
I didn't even bring the snakes out of the car. You know, I left them in the car.
Do you get freaked out when people speak in tongues, or you're okay with that?
I'm okay with it. I
Yeah.
think it's an issue that I'm fascinated by, but I don't really have. I haven't had personal experience
Oh,
with
okay.
myself of a prayer language
Uh,
I
called
have not
Dikut.
experienced that
Yeah.
myself.
You never faked it
Um,
just to go along to get along?
no, definitely not.
Do people do that?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, we know that at some point in time, um, people spoke in tongues. The question is, what does that mean? And I think you can see it in different settings. Like um, in the second chapter of Acts, it's like what seems to me to be clear is that these tongues were actually they were speaking because they needed to be able to speak to all the Jews and God-fearers who had traveled to Jerusalem um, during this during this feast time, right? During Shavuot, what you know, when they were celebrating the tablets coming down from Moses, what we would call Pentecost, right? The Jewish feast was Shavuot. So they're in the midst of that, and there's Greek, there's Greeks, and there's God-fearers, and there's Jews from the diaspora, from the Roman world that had traveled in, and they did speak different languages. And sure enough, like the Spirit moved and those people were communicated to. And it says what? That 3,000 were added to their number that day, right? Which is the same number that were killed at the foot of Mount Sinai, right? When the tablets came down. And so that kind of connects those two stories. So there are tongues there. Then Paul addresses tongues in Corinthians, and I'm not sure that he's talking about exactly the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Because you need
And
an interpreter for that.
yeah, so I don't have that all figured out myself. I lean in the direction that the gifts of God that are manifold, and we, even the listings of the gifts that are given in 3 or 4 places of the scriptures, I don't think that those are exhaustive lists. And I have a book in me that I haven't written yet, but it would be it'll probably be my third book. I'm in the midst of writing my second, but my third book would likely be a book on the spiritual gifts and an illustration from the life of Jesus about how he embodies each spiritual gift. I don't think anybody's written that,
Cool.
but I think Jesus is the full manifestation of the fully gifted human, God man.
Yeah.
And but nonetheless, I think God gives gifts to men and women, obviously. And Paul talks about this right in the introduction to Romans. He said, "For I long to come to you, that I might in spirit impart some spiritual gift to you, and you to me." So the spirit obviously is the one that enables gifts, but we can impart gifts to others and they can impart gifts to us. That's weird, I think. And so in some ways, like, gifts aren't just things that you're born with, right?
Yeah.
Gifts are things that God gives to you through his Spirit.
Yeah, but have you never forgive me if you told me already, are you married?
Yes, married, 4 kids.
Okay, okay. Congratulations. So I mean, there's no doubt about it that you've given your wife gifts, she's given you gifts in terms of just opening you up so that you could be yourself, and then suddenly you're flourishing and you're. I mean, this is assuming you have a healthy marriage. I'm assuming I think that's the case, but correct me if
I'll
I'm
ask
wrong.
her.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll ask her if she feels like it's healthy or not.
But yeah, are you home now? Is this where a place of work or
No,
home?
I'm at my cigar lounge here in the south side of OKC.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
You have your very own cigar lounge?
yeah, me and a few friends. It's called
Wow.
Omerta Cigar Lounge, and we
Ah,
have one in Tulsa, one in Monroe, Louisiana,
none
and
in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, though?
we should come on. I'm gonna be up there this summer with my kids.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
Ah,
I'm gonna take them through Quebec, Montreal, and Toronto this summer.
nice. Wow. Very
We like to
cool.
travel for about a month each year and try to expose them to the world.
Wow. Yeah, well, before going live, I was telling you about the little cigarillo that I smoked when I was on a bike trip with my wife, and how that taste lingered for like hours. And you said you lose that when you're an experienced smoker. That's so sad.
Well, it's just it's the miracle of the way God made our enzymes in our saliva. It can break down that,
The
break down
chemical, the flavor,
the oils.
yeah.
Yeah, the oils of the tobacco.
Oh, wow. That's pretty wild. My wife's a big smoker, and she's a firm believer that it helped her to get through COVID because we didn't get the jab. And I don't smoke, but I mean I get sick a lot, so I think I may have had COVID a few times, but I didn't get tested because I refused to get tested. But we're not going to talk too much about that. But when it comes to the smoking, a lot of people say that the nicotine actually helps with
Yeah, well,
with the COVID.
I think obviously they can be abused, but I'm a big fan of caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol.
Yeah. And right now you're doing
I
making
got two of the three.
you got two out of three.
I had the other substance in mass earlier today.
Uh okay. Yeah, yeah. I asked a friend of mine what he does when he feels like he's getting sick, and he said, what does he do? He does alcohol and what was the other thing? Coffee. Yeah, alcohol and coffee. So
Oh,
that's
oh
that's what
yeah,
he
it's
does.
good. It's a good
Yeah.
combo. Yeah.
It would kill me though, because I've got a like a very delicate constitution. So it's like I'm always just on water all the time. So what are you smoking right now?
This is a Bishop's Blend. Why is it called the Bishop's Blend? Because
Because it's Catholic.
well, not because of the Catholic bishop, but because of an Amish bishop. Uh,
Oh,
so
ah,
the wrapper, which is the outer leaf of the cigar, is a Pennsylvania broadleaf. So from Amish
ah,
country in Pennsylvania.
oh, wow.
So they call it the Bishop's Blend, and it's a
Wow.
great cigar. It's really a nice. It has a bit of sweetness to it, and it's a nice cigar.
I'm gonna if you want to just talk about
Yeah,
your
that's good.
cigars, I'm gonna look something up. So you could just
Yeah, do
talk a
it.
little bit about your favorite cigars while I look
Yeah.
something up here. I want to ask you about.
Well, I spoke mostly Nicaraguan tobacco, and my favorite wrappers would be like a Mexican San Andres wrapper over a Nicaraguan binder and filler, or an Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, or or some kind of Nicaraguan wrapper. But every once in a while, I enjoy something like this Pennsylvania broadleaf. I was in Pittsburgh, and some guys pointed me to this cigar shop, and they had this Pennsylvania broadleaf Bishop's Blend that they had made for their cigar shop since they were in Pennsylvania. And I really enjoyed that. So when we got some at our shop, I bought a bunch of them.
Cool, very cool. I just found what I was looking for. Uh, I bought like the leaf, the tobacco leaf for my wife. I bought it from the States, and we just got it. We got a shredder, so she's gonna make her own
Oh, that's awesome.
rollies from the whole leaf. She got flu cured Virginia thin leaf,
Okay.
first priming, one
Yep.
pound for $20 US. Is that good?
I don't know. I don't really price tobacco. I mean, I don't buy any raw tobacco, so it's hard for me
Uh,
to know.
Anyway,
But
it
yeah,
smelled great. It smelled great because you shred it fresh. It smelled
yeah.
amazing,
Oh,
and
I bet.
I actually had a little puff on it. It tasted good.
Yeah.
But I accidentally ordered the first time I ordered light fire cured tobacco, and she said when she found out I'm doing it for cigarettes, she said no, you have to get the flue
Flu
cured.
cured.
So
Yeah.
what's the difference there?
And what's interesting is, like, in cigars, there's only like a few cigars that are fire cured. Almost everything else is just cured naturally,
Ah,
without it's just cured or ferment.
it
Like,
just sits
the
around. It
curing
just sits
process is a
around.
fermentation process.
Is it a room
So
temperature? Is it a room temperature thing or
it's not, I mean, it's call it room temperature in Nicaragua, which is hot and
ah
humid, right? So they
ah
they put the tobacco leaves. They lay them into a pilon. Think of a pillow of tobacco, and they wrap that in a burlap, and they place it, and then they monitor the temperature of it, because it's going to go through a fermentation process with
oh
the natural bacterias and so on that will help the leaf to cure. And
ah
then from there they rotate it, so they'll open up that pilon, and you can look at you
yeah.
can look up YouTube videos and see how they do it. It's
So
pretty cool.
it's in an oxygen poor environment. Like they don't want a lot of oxygen. Is that right? That's why
They
they.
put it in a big, like, curing shed or curing warehouse.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. It's probably oxygen. Maybe it's lower. I mean, there's still oxygen around,
Well, the
but
fact that they're bundling it,
they
the fact
try to
they're
go.
bundling it, yeah.
Yeah, they try to go low and slow
Ah,
with.
okay.
They don't want the temperature to spike. They just want it to be gentle and gradual.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting hobby, and we've got a. He's not a saint, but he's a really interesting guy in the Catholic Church. It's G.K. Chesterton. He wrote a lot of really
Oh
witty
yeah,
things, very funny and insightful. And he was big on these sort of manly arts of smoking and drinking and stuff
yeah,
like
for
that.
sure. I think it helps you to slow down,
Uh,
right? I think, regardless of what you choose for your
well, I do
activity,
tea. I do
everybody,
herbal tea. I do herbal tea.
yeah, but you have to slow, like, you can't do it fast.
Yeah.
It's not a thing. Like, you can't drink your tea. You can't guzzle your tea. You got to sip your tea, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, so it helps you to slow down. And I think that's what allows it to be in some ways a spiritual exercise, because we slow down enough where we can meditate or think upon some things that we need to think about, right,
It's
in our lives.
it's funny because the reason my wife's like going hardcore, like she even flavors her own tobacco. She like, I mean, you may not approve of that, but she puts she likes to do mint because she used to smoke menthols back in the day, and
Oh yeah.
she likes them long and thin. Like she's very particular. But you know the reason for all this do it yourself stuff, which may turn out to be a blessing, but the reason for it is because the government of Canada is so neurotic, like pushing cigarettes and alcohol, but at the same time saying you can't have flavors, you can't have this, you can't have that, and it's
Yeah.
just like it's just so neurotic. Do you
Yeah.
have the same thing down there with the government trying to put their nose in your business?
Yeah. So so there's two government bodies that regulate tobacco: the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. They've been very heavy-handed with flavors, and
Ah,
we have some friends that are really pushing back on that. And as an owner of a store, we thoroughly oppose that. Like, we
yeah,
want people to have choices of what they
yeah.
want to enjoy. And then the other arm that in the U.S. government that regulates tobacco is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Department,
Ah,
and they're more focused on taxation. So obviously, we like our legislators, our government politicians. Many of them enjoy a good cigar. So there's been more favorable treatment to cigars than there has been
ah,
cigarettes and so on. Um,
ah.
but yeah, on both sides of the aisle, there's a lot of politicians in the U.S. that enjoy a good cigar.
Would you be willing to ship an order over to Epstein Island, or is that that's a
Well,
bridge too
yeah,
far?
I'd
That's
love
a
to.
bridge too far.
I'd love to, or we'll hand deliver in Montreal and we'll eat a good steak together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I'm not big on steak either. I don't think we're gonna jive when it comes to lifestyle. Okay, it's like I can't digest red meat. Like, I'm like,
Oh no. It's like
no.
my friends in Colombia, they almost everyone in Colombia is lactose intolerant.
No, I'm not
So if you go to
lactose
the
intolerant. No.
yeah, if you go to the grocery store, they all the milk that they sell is lactose intolerant milk.
My diet is pretty much like rice and vegetables. So
I'm
yeah.
probably the opposite. Bacon and beef.
Did you get into the? I do love bacon. That's one thing I will eat. But did you get into the whole keto fad? Are you into that?
It's funny. I need to get back on it, but I ate carnivore for
Ah,
about a year, little over a year, and it really was helpful for me.
it's expensive though.
It's expensive. Well, what's funny is it is obviously more expensive than buying rice. You end up not eating as much. Like, you
Oh,
end up, as long as you have enough fat
uh,
you have to really focus on getting the cuts that you're eating to
uh,
be very high in fat.
mhm.
Um, you don't want to be eating chicken breasts. You want to
Right.
be eating like some fatty cuts of beef or
Pork.
pork or whatever. Um, but yeah, for me, it was really helpful.
So, segueing a little bit into again back into the Christian world, and in particular the Protestant world, there's certain corners of the Protestant world where they're very, very uptight. No drinking, no smoking, no dancing. No music, no secular music. Can you just sort of explain to me, because you're American, I'm up in Canada. Um, have you experienced that firsthand, and what's the psychology behind it? Is it a mental illness, or is there a good reason, good biblical reason behind it? Like, because we're supposed to drink a little wine, Paul says, and whatever. So,
Yeah, I do think that a friend of mine, actually my friend Ray, was with a Muslim cleric in Israel, of all places.
uh,
And he was actually getting some permission to film at a particular site. And he tells a story of going into that Muslim cleric's office, and the guy was very agitated and very aggressive at the beginning of the meeting. And he was trying to understand why. And this gentleman said, he pointed out of his window, and Ray looked out of the window like, what am I looking at? And as he looked out of the window, the Muslim cleric was pointing at all the satellite dishes.
Uh-huh.
And what he was telling my friend Ray was, in essence, you Americans, how dare you? You're piping in
Mm,
garbage into
mm,
our households every
mm.
day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that's part of where it comes from. Is it always communicated that succinctly or clearly? No. A lot of it, there's a lot of people that just want to shelter their children.
Uh,
And I can understand that, right?
yeah.
Live in an age of innocence. But when you think about, like, when I think of what I tell my children is, we're preparing you to take on the world. And do I think that Paul prepared for many years at the feet of Gamaliel? Absolutely. Did Jesus himself take his disciples to the gates of hell, and then he declared that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church? Absolutely. I mean, that for Catholics, it's a great text, right?
Yeah.
Um, and but Jesus took his followers to the
Mm.
gates of hell, literally, where they were worshiping Pan at the foot of Mount Hermon, in northern Israel.
Have you been there? Are you going to go there?
Absolutely, I've been there many times.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been there many times. It's real. I mean, it's a real experience. You should come with me, or we should go to Turkey together.
Yeah.
But I can shelter my children to some extent, but not forever,
Mm.
right? And so I would rather teach them to take on the world. I joke with my children. My kids think I'm
How
hilarious.
old are they?
They're 11, 10, 8, and 6.
Nice
Two boys,
ages. Yeah.
yeah, 2 boys, 2 girls. But I pull dad jokes like, winning isn't everything. And then my kids repeat back, it's the only thing. Well, it's because we're not raising kids to be the tail. We're raising kids to be the head, not the tail. And and I'm not, there's a reason that Jesus amongst his followers tended to pick some zealots, and I could talk about how many zealots I think he had amongst his crew.
Yeah.
Um, but there were certainly some guys that were packing some heat, in terms of a few couple swords. Hey, Jesus, we got a couple
Uh,
swords. He says, yeah, that'll be enough. He's got Simon, who happens to be from a zealot town, from Simon Iscariot, from Cario, which was a zealot town. He's uh, Peter lopping off Malchus's ear. Obviously, he thought the kingdom was going to come through a little different manner, and had to be corrected a few times before he really caught the vision. But nonetheless, that's what I think. Like, I don't look at this as some sort of let's sit back and take it. God, by his Holy Spirit, is empowering us as parents to raise our children, and we leave it in his hands. We do the best that we can. We fail often, but those kids are going to see that mom and dad have a real, authentic life with God, empowered by the Spirit, with a firm faith in the risen Jesus. And that's going to overcome whatever bad lyrics they might hear or whatever subversive messages come at them, because there's nothing more subversive than the good news that there's God became man, was raised from the dead, and rules over the universe today. That's what my kids are going to capture, and that's more subversive than any Taylor Swift lyric or any rap song or whatever.
um, I don't remember if you mentioned it during your story, but you started young at 6, 7, whatever, and you didn't. I don't think you mentioned sort of straying too far. How far did you stray? Like I went full on atheist. I was born and raised Protestant. At age 14, lost my faith like in a heartbeat, and just went 25 years as an atheist. So that's pretty extreme. And I became a Satanist. So that's pretty extreme. But you didn't have anything even remotely close to that, right?
Well, I think for sure in middle school, it was rebellion from parents. It was rebellion from
Yeah.
God. It was, mild drug and alcohol use at far too young of an age. It was doing the, rebellious and destructive things that, you know,
Kids do.
13, 14, 15-year-old boys do. And if they continue, you continue into young adulthood and you end up in a lot more trouble. Thank God that I made it, well, and it was God's providence. We moved from one area to another. I had an opportunity to reset and decide, consciously to hang out with a little different crowd, and thank God found some mentors and some guidance, right?
Yeah,
Without God's hand and providence in those moments, just like you, at certain moments in your life, God's God acts through fellow human beings and image bearers of, and through his spirit.
absolutely. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you just some sort of cultural questions about the U.S. Just give me your take. But one of the things is racism, and the whole black white thing, and um, from Canada it looks kind of strange. It's like it's 2024. What the hell's going on? Like, I mean, do people really care about skin color or whatever? So it's got to be deeper than that. I mean, usually, I just think it has to do with opportunity or with privilege or with money, basically. Basically money. And my wife just told me, she showed me a clip. Some guy was, I think it was Ice Cube, that was talking about how the same people that were, running these record labels for the hip hop rap scene, they also have interest in these prisons where all the black people were ending up. And I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a conspiracy theory, if that's real, but there's this sort of idea that there's a systemic oppression of certain classes or certain races or whatever you want to call them. What's your take on all that sort of stuff? It's a very delicate topic, but what's your take?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's no denying that there have been historic injustices that were systematic and experienced individually, and perpetuated by individuals and through
The system.
governments and through systems, right? No doubt about it. Absolutely. And are there things today that are still doing that? Absolutely. Um, I think the stories we tell ourselves are really powerful, and I love the way that you begin your discussion by talking biographically about someone's background, and the decision to describe your own biography in a set of either um, uh, hardships, but then triumph, or God's providence and then His Spirit moving. Like, if we choose to tell ourselves the story of our lives in those terms versus telling the story of our lives in terms of uh, tragedy, hardship, failure, tragedy, hardship, failure, tragedy, hardship,
Mm.
failure.
Yeah.
Everyone experiences tragedy and hardship in one form or another, one degree or another. Have I experienced the worst? Absolutely not. I've had a very blessed life. Um, the people that are most successful, whether it's in Canada, the United States, or anywhere, I think focus on telling their story in a way that uplifts them and in a way that recognizes God's sovereignty and his blessing at crucial moments. And I would say there's real present racism in the world, and it's detestable. And is there some in the United States? Absolutely. I travel the world. There's racism, there's ethnic strife in other parts of the world, and
Yeah.
it's detestable. We're all image bearers of God, and when we experience or perpetuate racism, um, I would contest that, and I don't know others that have really put it in this language, but that is idolatry.
Ah.
Why is it idolatry? And I think idolatry is the number one thing that the apostles and the prophets
Yeah.
push back against.
Yeah.
Why is it idolatry? It's because you're profaning a fellow image bearer.
Mm.
And image bearers, you and I and others, regardless of our belief, regardless of whether we recognize the creator of the universe or not, we bear his image. And God God got rid of idols not because he was opposed to these graven images or these, clay statuettes. He opposed them because he already made them. They were you and me. We are the image of God. We are the true idols. right? To put it in kind of, we are God's witnesses. You are my witnesses, the scriptures say, right? What does that mean? Well, to a world that, Isaiah, Jeremiah, or John and Paul walked into, they saw idolatry all around them. And we are God's witnesses. We are God's idols. We are God's image bearers. So that's how I look at it. I detest every form of racism. I do think there's a lot of socioeconomic challenges, and there are many divides in the United States that fall more on socioeconomic lines. So you can see the same hardships that are actually experienced by poor whites as there are poor blacks. You have failures of marriages, you have children born out of wedlock, you have high crime rates, high drug usage. It doesn't just cut along racial lines. There's certainly some statistics that are very striking racially, but I'm not sure. Sometimes we diagnose the root cause incorrectly, and the root cause in some cases falls more along socioeconomic lines. But that's also detestable. If there are systematic things that are perpetuated against people, against the poor, right? And the scriptures certainly have plenty to say about the poor. And when the poor cry out to God because of injustice and oppression, God hears their cry. We ought to be absolutely terrified, because when God hears their cry in the scriptures, he acts. He acts against those oppressors. And I do firmly believe what Romans tells us. Leave room for God. We don't have to seek vengeance. We don't have to right every wrong. Leave room. The scariest verse in the entire Bible, in my opinion, is the verse that says, leave room for God to act. That is terrifying to me, right? Because he will act.
Yeah.
And he does seek, he is the one that delivers ultimate justice.
Where does it say this? Is it Romans, you said?
Romans 12, yeah.
Romans 12?
Leave
Okay.
room for God to act.
Ah.
Scary, right?
Yeah. Well,
Terrifying.
I'm always harping on about Romans 11 with the Jews, that, all of Israel's going to come back in. I also ask pretty much every guest, Christian or not, I ask them about the Jews and Israel. But especially the Christians, because there's a lot of divide amongst Christians over, the Zionism and the political the state of Israel. I'm anti-Zionist. I'm against the state of Israel, but that's, I could be wrong, but that's just my hunch. But what's your take? Do you think it's biblical? Do you think it's God's ordaining will that the state of Israel be formed, and this is preparing for the end times? Or do you think that we kind of forced God's hand?
Let's be clear. The modern nation state of Israel is not the same Israel as the biblical people group.
That's what I think, but yeah.
That's I mean, it's hard to make an argument that it's the exact same, because I've been traveling to Israel since 1999.
Yeah.
The people that are citizens of Israel, there's Jewish citizens of Israel, there's Christian citizens of Israel, there's Muslims, there's Arab citizens of Israel, there's Arab Christians, there's Arab Muslims.
Yeah.
There are Jews? There are Jewish atheists.
Yeah. There's no shortage of them.
So let's be clear.
Yeah.
The modern nation state of Israel is not it's not what we read of.
Yeah.
It's not it ain't Jacob's people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So it ain't Jacob's peeps. But and David, I appreciate how deep you go here. The thought exercise I like to take people through is to take them back to when Jesus appears on the scene in whatever it is, 2 or 3 AD. We could debate on when the birth takes place, right? And then he dies, call it 33 AD, plus or minus. The temple is obviously the veil was torn in two, and there was a seismic event. I mean, seismic physically and spiritually, that occurred at that point. But then the temple is still operating, and those sacrifices are still occurring twice a day. And there are faithful Jews who seek to obey God and are relying upon his promise for those sacrifices to stand in their place for their sins. And they're faithfully going to festivals and so on until the Romans destroy the physical temple. Right? So if we go back through that thought exercise, and this kind of gets back to the Romans 11 discussion, but I like to go through that exercise and ask people, okay, I'm a Jew in 40 AD, and I attend temple, and I live as a faithful Jew. I wear tzitzit, I pray, phylacteries, all that good stuff. I obey the law. I seek to obey the law. And when I don't obey the law, the sacrifices stand in my place. Now, I believe Hebrews that says that Jesus is so many things. He's our temple. He's our sacrifice. He's it all. And so today, his sacrifice once and for all, stands in my place. Thank God. But if you just go back through and do those gyrations, and then Paul brings to bear, like, okay, there's these two different groups, and the Gentiles are being brought in. Obviously, Judaism was always meant to be a religion where proselytes and God-fearers were welcome. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had the size of the court of the nations is the largest part of the temple. So it was always meant to be a religion that proselytized the nations. And God always envisioned, before Jesus or Paul came on the scene, he envisioned the nations being brought into fellowship with him through the example of his people, Israel.
Through the priesthood. They're supposed to be the priestly people to the nations. That's the whole point.
Yeah. So I say all that to say, I really like to get people to think about the first century. And even, Jesus comes on the scene and has all of his followers were Jews. When I say, I mean his apostles and, the 70 and the 500, they were Jews. And then, he had certain critical moments where he went to a woman, who begged for bread and,
Crumbs under the table, even?
Yeah. And, but even the dogs have to eat. And he said, wow, I haven't seen this kind of faith in all of Israel. But all that kind of let's go through all those steps and put yourself in each character's shoes in 15 AD, in 30 AD when Jesus' ministry begins, in 33 when he's dead, buried, and raised. He's on the earth for a time, then he ascends. What's going on spiritually in these settings? And then the temple continues to operate till 68 AD. I don't know. I don't have that all figured out, but what helps me to understand it is to put myself as a Jew in this, as a God-fearer in this, thinking about the temple sacrifices. The shofar is still being blown twice a day, right? Now, obviously, Jesus' crucifixion follows that same model, right? With the timeline in terms of the daily sacrifice. He was both the morning and the evening sacrifice.
Very cool. So, when it comes to the end times, I know it remains veiled and it's a mystery, but in the Catholic Church, we see this as the end times, the age of the church that we're in now, ever since the death and resurrection, ever since Pentecost, I guess. But there are a lot of Protestants with different views, and they talk about the rapture, and they talk about the sort of the millennial period or whatever that is. Do you have firm positions on all the sort of end times questions, or no?
Not really firm, but I spend a lot of time reading John's letters to the 7 churches, and I spend time in those churches themselves, in those cities in Asia Minor.
Oh, yeah?
And so I spend some time thinking about what John's hearers heard from both his gospel and as well as his revelation. and it's fascinating. I hope to take you there. I hope we'll be hanging out and walking in Smyrna or in Ephesus, where John's hometown was, or go over to Philadelphia, where they're just now rebuilding the theater in Philadelphia.
Ah.
Um, but going to those places and hearing his words and I will say, of encouragement and exhortation and even correction or rebuke to each of those churches. Pergamum, fascinating. One of my favorite sites. I mean, besides Ephesus, Pergamum's probably my second favorite. But uh, John says Pergamum's Satan's seat. It's where Satan lives. Well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean a whole lot to people today, because most of them have never been to Pergamum.
Mm-hmm.
But to John wrote to his circuit churches. Imagine him as a circuit preacher living in Ephesus, caring for Mary into her old age, and he rode that circuit, walked that circuit, and preached to all of those churches. They knew him well, and he was writing in the time of Domitian, cursed be he, and Domitian was absolutely an antichrist. Absolutely. He was so bad the Romans scratched his name off the record books, right? You got to be pretty bad, right? I mean, there's two
Yeah.
things the Romans eventually scratched. They scratched Dionysus's festival. They actually scratched some Artemis stuff too, because it got a little too debauched. And that's saying something if it got too debauched for the Romans. And then, Domitian, Nero and Domitian were pretty. I mean, they were about as bad as they get. But that's who John was writing to. It had taken on a whole new life from when Paul is writing to when John is writing. I mean, Paul saw the beginnings of the emperor cult. John saw it in full swing, and it was an absolute mess. And obviously, Christians were being tortured and persecuted and killed, and John was writing words of encouragement to them. So I think, and Jesus himself, obviously, in Matthew in particular, has some very prophetic things to say about the end of the age, which I look at most of what Jesus said there as being firmly in what he saw coming with the fall of Jerusalem and other crucial moments like the siege at Masada and the massacre at Gamla. And we could talk for days about different historical events that occurred there in the first century that Jesus foretold.
Yeah, it's amazing. So to have such a rich, in-depth understanding because you've been there, because you've obviously studied, the archaeology and the history, and it's amazing. It's a beautiful part of the world. Anyway, I've been to Greece because my wife is Greek. Well,
Nice.
actually, I had gone before I met her, but I met her here in Canada. But yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the world. That whole Mediterranean kind of
Oh,
vibe,
it's
the
amazing.
food, the sun. It's just different. Everything's different there. It's just better. I love it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's so amazing, and I have a soft spot in my heart also for Turkey. I think it's a beautiful big country with a lot going on culturally, and yeah, again, the food. I mean, it's hard to really distinguish. The music, the food. It's all the same stuff.
It's
It's
all
it's
good.
all
It's all
good. It's
good.
all good. And nice
Yeah.
warm people, very warm people, and
Oh, for sure. I
yeah.
always say that they're hospitable like Middle Easterners, and they work like Germans. They're industrious.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Very interesting. But we could talk for hours, but I have to go. Like I said, I've got this
Yeah.
anti-vaxxer
Well,
party to go to. But I
go
hope you
do
come
the
back.
Lord's work there.
Yeah, I hope you come back, Brian, because
Anytime.
I mean, I just need to ask you a little question, and you can come up with like a lot of treasure, for me. So I want to sit at your feet some more and talk about the
Let's do it.
Bible some
Let's do it
more.
live in Montreal this summer.
Yeah, for
God willing.
sure. Very cool, very cool. If you do come, and it sounds like you're going to come, definitely check out St. Joseph's Oratory. Like with or without me, you got to find St. Joseph's Oratory. It's the big church on the hill. It's Catholic,
Yeah.
but it's a tourist site, so a lot of people go. Like Muslims go there, Hindus go there, and Protestants go there. It's a special place. A lot of miracles took place there. I don't know if you're aware of that fact, but
I was there as a child, as a Boy Scout. I went,
oh no
but
way.
I'll have to take my kids there.
Oh,
I went when I was 13 or so, toured through Quebec and Montreal.
oh,
But
wow.
it's been so many years. I can remember the fairly steep hill that it's
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. It's on the hill. So I don't know if you know, but I enroll each and every one of my guests in a perpetual mass. You're going to be getting the graces of the mass every day
Oh wow.
until the end of time. You and your family are enrolled. So in exchange, if you don't mind just adding me to your implicit prayer list or add me to some list or something and pray for me, when you think about me, just raise your thoughts to God, and
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, David.
Okay, my brother.
Bless God for you.
Yeah, there was a line, I forget where it was, where it says David blessed the Lord. David blessed the Lord. It's like
Absolutely.
it's somewhere in the Old Testament there.
There's also something about him dancing naked, but we'll leave that out for you.
Yeah,
We'll leave
yeah,
that out
yeah.
for
He
you.
got up to a lot of stuff, but yeah, yeah. So God bless you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure meeting you. It's a real joy, and congratulations on your family and your businesses and your life. And I look forward. I hope to get to know you and hear lots of stories from you. Okay.
Thanks, David. We'll do it
God bless
again.
you.
Talk
Love you.
soon. God bless you.
Talk
Bye
soon.
bye.
Bye. Bye.